Hi, 5th grade. Mrs. Pecora here, back to read Roald Dahl, The Witches. Just wanted to let you know a couple things. First, I am outside again, enjoying this beautiful fall day. So if you hear some noises, you might hear some birds, you might hear some squirrels, you might hear some other sounds. Also, my puppy Winston is outside with me as well. So if you hear some weird noises, he's chewing a broom and he's running around my deck like a maniac. So don't be alarmed. Just pay attention to the story. So we left off the young character. He ended up living with his grandmama, because his parents died in a tragic accident. So she was telling him all sorts of stories. But then she started telling him about witches. And she says everything she says about witches is real. It is not made up. So let's continue reading and see what happens in The Witches by Roald Dahl. Okay, so we left off here. Let's see if you guys can see this. Sorry, boys and girls, trying to make sure this is okay. You hear the broom scraping across my deck? Yep, that would be Winston. Okay. Hold on one second. Being a little loud there. Okay. All right, so we left off that they were all around us, and I had better believe that too. Are you really being truthful, Grandmama? Really and truthful? My darling, she said, you won't last long in this world if you don't know how to spot a witch when you see one. But you told me that witches look like ordinary women, Grandmama, so how can I spot them? You must listen to me, my grandmother said. You must remember everything I tell you. After that, all you can do is cross your heart and pray. Oh, sorry, boys and girls, he's running. And pray to heaven and hope for the best. We were in the big living room of our house in Oslo, and I was ready for bed. The curtains were never drawn in a house, and through the windows I could see huge snowflakes falling slowly on the outside world that was as black as tar. My grandmother was tremendously old and wrinkled, with a massive wide body, which was smothered in gray lace. She sat there majestic in her armchair, filling every inch of it. Not even a mouse could have squeezed in to sit beside her. I myself, just 7 years old, was crouched on the floor at her feet, wearing pajamas, dressing gown, and slippers. You swear you aren't pulling my leg? I kept saying to her. You swear you aren't just pretending? Listen, she said. I have known no less than 5 children who have simply vanished off the face of this earth, never to be seen again. The witches took them. I still just think you're trying to frighten me, I said. I am trying to make sure you don't go the same way, she said. I love you, and I want you to stay with me. Tell me about the children who disappeared, I said. My grandmother was the only grandmother I ever met who smoked cigars. She lit one now, a long black cigar that smelt of burning rubber. The first child I knew who disappeared, she said, was called Ragnhild Hansen. Ragnhild was about 8 years old at the time, and she was playing with her little sister on the lawn. Their mother, who was baking bread in the kitchen, came outside for a breath of air. Where's Ragnhild? She said. She went away with the tall lady, the little sister said. What tall lady? The mother said. The tall lady in white gloves, said the little sister. She took Ragnhild by the hand and led her away. No one, my grandmother said, ever saw Ragnhild again. Didn't they search for her? I asked. They searched for miles around. Everyone in the town helped, but they never found her. What happened to the other 4 children? I asked. They vanished just as Ragnhild did. How, Grandmama? How did they vanish? In every case, a strange lady was seen outside the house just before it happened. But how did they vanish? I asked. The second one was very peculiar, my grandmother said. There was a family called Christensen. They lived up on Holmholken, and they had an oil painting in the living room, which they were very proud of. The painting showed some ducks in the yard outside a farmhouse. There were no people in the painting, just a flock of ducks on a grassy farmyard, and the farmhouse in the background. It was a large painting, and rather pretty. Well, one day, their daughter Slovig came home from school eating an apple. She said a nice lady had given it to her on the street. The next morning, little Slovig was not in her bed. The parents searched everywhere, and they couldn't find her. Then all of a sudden, the father shouted, There she is! That's Slovig feeding the ducks! He was pointing at the oil painting, and sure enough, Slovig was in it. She was standing in the farmyard in the act of throwing bread to the ducks out of a basket. The father rushed up to the painting and touched her, but that didn't help. She was simply a part of the painting, just a picture painted on the canvas. Did you ever see that painting, Grandmama, with the little girl in it? Many times, my grandmother said, and the peculiar thing was that little Slovig kept changing her position in the picture. One day she would actually be inside the farmhouse, and you could see her face looking out the window. Another day she would be far over to the left with a duck in her arms. Did you see her moving in the picture, Grandmama? Nobody did. Wherever she was, whether outside feeding the ducks or inside looking out of the window, she was always motionless, just a figure painting in the oils. It was all very odd, my grandmother said. Very odd indeed. And what was most odd of all was that as the years went by, she kept growing older in the picture. In 10 years, the small girl had become a young woman. In 30 years, she was middle-aged. Then all at once, 54 years after it happened, she disappeared from the picture altogether. You mean she died? I asked. Who knows, my grandmother said. Some very mysterious things go on in the world of witches. That's two you've told me about, I said. What happened to the third one? The third one was little Bridget Svensson, my grandmother said. She lived just across the road from us. One day she started growing feathers all over her body. Within a month, she had turned... Oh, sorry, boys and girls, trying to line it up here. Into a large white chicken. Her parents kept her for years in a pen in the garden. She even laid eggs. What color eggs? I asked. Brown ones, my grandmother said. Biggest eggs I've seen in my life. Her mother made omelets out of them. Delicious they were. I gazed up at my grandmother, who sat there like some ancient queen on her throne. Her eyes were misty gray, and they seemed to be looking at something many miles away. The cigar was the only real thing about her at that moment, and the smoke it made billowed around her head in blue clouds. But the little girl who became a chicken didn't disappear, I said. No, not Bridget. She lived on for many years, laying her brown eggs. You said all of them disappeared. I made a mistake, my grandmother said. I am getting old. I can't remember everything. What happened to the fourth child? I asked. The fourth boy was called Harold, my grandmother said. One morning, his skin went all grayish yellow. Then it became hard and crackly like the shell of a nut. By evening, the boy had turned to stone. Stone? I said. You mean real stone? Granite, she said. I'll take you to see him if you like. They still keep him in the house. He stands in the hall, a little stone statue. Visitors lean their umbrellas up against him. Although I was very young, I was not prepared to believe everything my grandmother told me. And yet she spoke with such conviction, with such utter seriousness, and with never a smile on her face or a twinkle in her eye. I found myself beginning to wonder. Go on, Grandmama, I said. You told me there were 5 altogether. What happened to the last one? Would you like a puff of my cigar? She said. I'm only 7, Grandmama. I don't care what age you are, she said. You'll never catch a cold if you smoke cigars. What about number 5, Grandmama? Number 5, she said, chewing the end of her cigar as though it were delicious asparagus, was a rather interesting case. A 9-year-old boy called Leaf was summer holidaying with his family in the fjord, and the whole family was picnicking and swimming off some rocks on one of those little islands. Young Leaf dived into the water, and his father, who was watching him, noticed that he stayed under for an unusually long time. When he came back to the surface, at last, he wasn't Leaf anymore. What was he, Grandmama? He was a porpoise. He wasn't. He couldn't have been. He was a lovely young porpoise, she said, and as friendly as could be. Grandmama, I said. Yes, my darling. Did he really and truly turn into a porpoise? Absolutely, she said. I knew his mother well. She told me all about it. She told me how Leaf the porpoise stayed with them all that afternoon, giving his brothers and sisters rides on his back. They had a wonderful time. Then he waved a flipper, at them and swam away, never to be seen again. But Grandmama, I said, how did they know that the porpoise was actually Leaf? He talked to them, my grandmother said. He laughed and joked with them all the time he was giving them rides. But wasn't there a most tremendous fuss when this happened? I asked. Not much, Grandmother said. You must remember that here in Norway we are used to that sort of thing. There are witches everywhere. There's probably one living in our street this very moment. It is time you went to bed. A witch wouldn't come in through my window in the night, would she? I asked, quaking a little. No, my grandmother said. A witch will never do silly things like climbing up drain pipes or breaking into people's houses. You'll be quite safe in your bed. Come along, and I'll tuck you in. All right, boys and girls, we're going to end right there with Roald Dahl, the Witches. Sorry for all the noise in the background. My naughty little puppy was chewing the broom and banging it into my legs. Let me see if I can find him for you so you guys can see my naughty little puppy here. There he is, chewing the broom. Winston. Oh, there he is. He likes the story too, boys and girls. Don't let him fool you. He just is a puppy and likes to play with the broom. All right, boys and girls, that's it for today. See you tomorrow. Bye-bye. Oh, goodness. Why am I stopping? Stop. Boys and girls, don't know why it's stopping.